Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and of course, it's a pleasure to have someone I had a conference with just get tenure at the University of Maine. So congratulations. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk with you today and talk about some of the work that I'm both doing in Delaware and around the country. And so we're going to talk about nudging people to improve water quality. And I'll try to feel that, probably everyone's comfortable with what water quality is. What's a nudge? How do we talk about a large-scale economic experiment? Hopefully by the end of this discussion today, you'll have a better sense of what all that's about. But there really needs to be some initial thank yous. And it really starts with David Hart and the Mitchell Center here for bringing me in and housing me and making me welcome. And I am deeply appreciative to it. I think I've had the pleasure of knowing David since Kathleen introduced me to him. Dr. Bell introduced him almost 6 years ago or so at a conference. And I've always been admiring the work that's been happening here at Maine on really engaging stakeholders and bringing science to the public, right? And making it relevant to the decision makers and the community members here, and really addressing key state issues that face the state. And so when actually and I'll talk about this briefly, I'm now directing Delaware's Track 1 EBSCOR project. And that's a $23 million project. And one of the first things I did when I found out I was awarded is I said, I'm going to call David and see if he'll be my mentor and see if I can learn from the Mitchell Center and what's been here at Maine so that I can become more effective at bringing that type of approach to Delaware. And so it's kind of nice to be here, learn from the students, faculty, postdocs that have been engaged in this work here, and ultimately share that knowledge to my jurisdiction down in Delaware. So while I'll talk about some interesting trends that I at least find interesting around the country, I also want to get into some specific research, and I want to acknowledge my co-authors. Caroline mentioned Paul Ferraro at Johns Hopkins University. He co-directs the CBER with me, so I have that pleasure. And then, of course, we've got lots of colleagues throughout the country, and I'll be highlighting work along the way. So, if you follow with me, hopefully by the end we'll have a good story about what nudges are and why they're meaningful and why we need to do more work in this area. So, one of the key things is evidence-based research. And evidence-based research is something that's very valuable from an academic perspective, but it's incredibly odd or sad to see that it's not part of most policy discussions, right? That when we have a new policy, we think it's a good idea, and we get voters to support a good policy because it's got a nice framing, and then we stop paying attention, and we look for really simple before and after explanations, and that isn't necessarily good science. It's not how we do science in a lot of other contexts. So how can we bring strong evidence-based to policy and programs by using good economic science and hopefully improve policies and programs going forward? And there's some challenges of doing this. It's not as just simple as wanting to have it and measuring carefully. We have a perennial problem right now with the replication crisis that you may be hitting social sciences. And one of that is the low-powered studies that are often happening in our discipline. And I'm a guilty person of this myself, so I criticize myself in my past and talk about the need to improve it and why. And I want to get into some little bit of methodology, but I think once you think about this methodology, you may never see studies in the same way. So it's worth going there. And then talk about some maybe promising results from some large field experiments. I don't think I need to spend too much time on this slide, right? This is something that you all know, and you could take this type of dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico or algal blooms in the Great Lakes, and you could add a whole bunch of new problems that are relevant to Maine or other areas, right? The key thing is we spend lots of money trying to prevent this, and yet it happens over and over again, right? And so, if we just think about the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we spend roughly $6.7 billion a year in certain conservation efforts, in which part of the goal is to actually make this problem go away, right? And you could say, well, that is a waste of money, right? We are spending $6.7 billion, and year after year, these problems persist or get worse. Well, maybe it's a waste of money, or maybe they've gotten a lot worse, right? If we hadn't spent that $6.7 billion. The sad thing is we don't know the answer to most of those questions. We don't know what did we get from those, year after year, decade after decade of major expenses. And that's in part because we roll out a program, and I call it spray and pray, right? We spray it around the country. This money goes to lots of places and lots of farmers to get the political support. And they've got good names, right? The Conservation Stewardship Program or the Conservation Reserve Program. You can have lots of happy farmers standing up and saying, I'm doing something for the environment, but we don't have a good sense of are they working or not? And would they have done these actions without the money, right? What do we really know about the change? And then if we, think about it not only in the agricultural sector, but then we think about, how do we get to the homeowner level? Well, what do we know about homeowners? They put a lot of fertilizer. Good estimates say there's more fertilizer being put on lawns per area than on farms, right? Because, well, it's kind of cheap, and you just throw it out there, and you hope your grass goes green, and you might have put it on your sidewalk, and that's all going to go into the water. It might go on your driveway, that's going to go straight into the water. There's a lot less concern about it at the local level, and yet, again, we have a kind of a spray and pray philosophy. Let's do something out there. If it sounds good, well, maybe it is good, and we'll have a couple shows for our websites, but maybe not moving the needle where we really want it to be moved, which is to actually improve water. And so, we're going to look at this, and the concept of nudges has been proposed in a lot of contexts, right? You might be very familiar with the Nudge book. If you haven't, it's a pretty great read. It's pretty fascinating, talking about really combining sociology, psychology, behavioral economics to make positive policy changes without having to mandate something, right? So it's in contrast to the command and control policies of the past. We are now going to just encourage people to become their better selves. And look, it works. If I give you a smaller plate, you'll eat less calories, right? Would be the argument. And you can, and you're going to be just as happy with a smaller plate. These are very subtle changes. Or if we see, that your neighbors are using less electricity than you are, studies say that, you end up conserving electricity to a certain extent. They often, you have to be a little careful. If you're better than your neighbors, then you lose your spousal fight, and the heat goes up, is what it suggests. So but we recognize that social pressures matter. We've even seen cases where retirement savings can matter. When you get your first job, one of the first things, the decisions is like, how much money of that you're going to take and put in your retirement savings. Well, that's the last thing you're thinking about, right? Retirement feels so far away. You don't know what the right percentage is. Is it 6%? Is it 3%? Is it 10%? Maybe you shouldn't be saving anything because you're just excited to have a job. And we found that, if we tell you save 6%, almost everyone agrees, right? And if they do, and they say no, they'll go to 5% or 4%. But if you started off with a 3%, they agree to that too. And they put a lot less money away for retirement. And so these small nudges have seemed to be in a variety of contexts to be very valuable. But if you think about these nudges, and if you study these nudges a lot, almost all of them are not related to the environment in a sense of from a producer side. They're almost all consumer choices about, here's my plate, how much will I eat out of it, or my retirement. Maybe my energy savings has a little bit of environmental benefit, but it's a lot of individual choices, and they're on private goods. But if we think about the context that I'm interested in, which is improving agriculture and environmental outcomes from agriculture, our $6.7 billion that we're spending on all these various programs, it looks like a very different person that we're trying to nudge, right? We're not nudging, a young person entering their first job. We're talking about people who've been farming their lands for generations, and they get their main income from it. How much is a Maine forest owner going to be nudged to better practices when it's their livelihood that's involved? And almost all of the reasons that we want to nudge them are for public benefits. And so we got public and private benefits. It's not just how do I consume less calories myself. It's now something that I want to have some broad benefits for society. And often these things are large stakes, right? These are not small decision-making processes. If I'm going to put my farm into a conservation reserve program, or if I'm going to rip up my lawn and put it into some native grasses, these are larger stake decisions than most of the research that's been out there about a small plate, a small choice there. And so one of the things that we've been working at is let's look at these things and whether they work, or which ones work in this context. Now, we aren't the only ones in this space that are working here. And so there's things called nudge squads out there, and it actually started in the UK. Less than 10 years ago, the UK had the first nudge squad. The White House under Obama had a nudge squad they called the Social and Behavioral Sciences Team, and they set out going forth with executive orders from Obama saying, go ahead and build in these behavioral insights so that we have better policy and delivery to the American people. And so we were set up, and USDA set forward a national competition for centers that could do this in the agro-environmental space, and that's the one that Paul Ferraro and I won with a coalition of people throughout the country that would work on these issues. We then saw that we actually helped write some of the executive orders implementation plan, and that, to my knowledge, was not yet been taken away by Trump. It still is in effect back in 2015. And then we were just renewed earlier this year by USDA and named a Center of Excellence. And so the idea of nudging, I think there's something like almost 40 different countries now have nudge squads that are going about. So there's a group up in Canada that's setting up one to work on this issue. I go to Europe and they were talking about it. There's a lot of focus in on them. And why? Why do we think these things could be cool? One is they're not political, right? They can survive a transition from the Obama administration to a Trump administration. If the goal is really just to make a program work better, achieve its objectives by being cost effective with taxpayer money, that's not necessarily a Republican or Democratic issue. And they certainly have seemed to work in other contexts. There's a whole variety of examples out there where these small adjustments can make an impact. Maybe there's 3, 4, 5% changes, but if you have enough of them going in the right direction, maybe they really do make an improvement. And often they're controlled by the local level. You don't need to have, DC is so gridlocked now, you can't get new policies there, but maybe a program administrator can put these in, right? Just they're in the domain of a small set of people, and they can try out new things. So, they're also good for voluntary programs, and certainly in the agro-environmental context, we have any, as a nation, we have no appetite apparently to regulate non-point source pollution from agriculture or from homes. And so if you're trying to voluntarily get people to do something, well, a nudge seems like a natural way of going about it. And one of the things that's really cool, if we do good experiments on it, the data really can sell itself to policymakers. And David and I have been discussing, how do you have your research mean something to the policymakers, the decision makers out there? And one of the challenges that at least economists face is that often our language isn't very inviting to those policymakers. We'll throw up a bunch of numbers, we'll have these complicated models, and one of the great things about this type of approach is you're often dealing with the exact type of person you want to deal with, right? You're talking about homeowners. They're making decisions on actual items for their decisions, and they can see it, and the results are often simple comparisons of means. If you design it well and you got enough power behind it, simple stories can be more convincing and compelling to an outside audience. And so that's why I think these nudge squads have gotten forward. And then one of the other thing that's been pushed forward is the real need to have better evidence-based in policy. And so there's again been executive orders in the Obama administration and continuing to the Trump administration, really calling for the need to having better ability to know what's working in government and what's not. And just a little bit of background there, there's a pretty active push right now. It was Speaker Paul Ryan and Patty Murray really put forth the Evidence-Based Policy Making Commission Act that really got going a couple years ago, released their final report in 2017. We also saw that the Trump administration put in another executive order calling for more evidence-based policy. And just in 2019, during, I don't know how you do this during the government shutdown, but even during the government shutdown, they really called for a new policy. So as an economist and you're trying to write a grant, right, use this, right? Say, this is why this is important. This type of evidence is being called for at a national level like it's never been called for before. And it's not about Trump or Obama. It is just a general idea of how to get better policy. So I think this, if we could ever get this, is lifetime employment for all economists, right? So this is something that if we could get more money behind it to make it happen, is a good news for those who are interested in this topic. And I think it's a really fascinating topic. And so we've been rolling this out in through our CBEAR organization, which is across the country. And then one of the exciting things, and one of the reasons I wanted to come up here and be part of this discussion up at the Mitchell Center, is it is part of our new EBSCOR Track 1. And that's a National Science Foundation's program. It's a $23 million grant. And we call it Project WICKED, which stands for Water in the Changing Coastal Environment of Delaware. And you guys often talk about wicked problems here in the Mitchell Center. We just grabbed the name and stuck it on top of our proposal because we thought that was appropriate. And we did, well, we were a little tricky. We were a little tricky by misspelling it, right? And the point is, if you're dealing with water, you're not going to solve it, right? You're not going to solve the problem at the end of a 5-year grant. But hopefully you make some insights that can improve it, and you can improve it over time. And it's going to require just the type of things that I know the Mitchell Center is committed to, and we are as well, which is to have multiple disciplines working together to understand it. So I know this is a little small, and I apologize, but we have natural scientists working on threat assessment to understand why do we have problems in Delaware with our coastal areas with eutrophication, changing salinity. And then we have a solutions-oriented piece as well that's led by social scientists and economists to looking at how do we understand behavior, how do we nudge it when we can do that, how can we inform policy and markets when we can, how can we really get to the decision support tools that is trying to really integrate in a convergent way to improve water in our state. And ultimately the implications for that will be not just relevant for Delaware, but the Mid-Atlantic and many coastal areas throughout the country and world. So that's a little bit of the motivation that kind of leads me into this project. And I would love to talk, about all these different projects that are going, but there's so many different application of nudges, and because the nudges have been so not well tested in this area, there's a lot of work for anyone who wants to go and look at these types of things. Our newest publications on mascots, right, and how we've seen Smokey Bear for a long time. Why does Smokey Bear seem to exist? Well, maybe it helps build social norms, and we tested a couple environmental mascots versus our UD mascot, and looked at social norm creation of mascots. But there's a lot of different nudges, and I won't go into all of these, but there's a lot of active work that we're going into to test it. Do these things work or not? Just because there's been a couple of big studies about it, we think that it's important to go back and replicate, right? Replicate these results, see if they work in other contexts, because sometimes they don't actually work too well. Now, one of the concerns that people have about some of the experimental work that I've done and others is a scene like this. You can imagine these are people making decisions in an experimental game. They've got some computers, and maybe they seem a little too happy, right? They seem like they're sharing information a bit. These aren't traditional farmers. They don't look like people that are there. Maybe they're not taking the game seriously enough. So whether right or wrong, we have tried to move, still do some experiments, but have our subject pool look more like this, right? Where we've got, we feel a little bit better about that lower scene, right? We have farmers who are making seemingly very deliberate decisions. They come from a diverse backgrounds and experiences, and if we feel like those results are there, maybe more salient to the policymakers that this is our group. And we often go to places like Moultrie, Georgia, which is a large ag expo in the southeast of the United States, where people are, farmers are coming to look at new tractors and equipment and everything, and then we intercept the folks there and have them participate in experiments. And again, the key thing is trying to make it in a way that policymakers or program administrators might feel stronger about the results. And so in this case, the study I'm going to talk about is on homeowners, right? So again, we want people like that who are looking at, home products that they could choose, some of which could be environmentally beneficial if they adopted and used them. And the questions that we will be looking at is, which products do they care about? And that's kind of a baseline. And then we'll see if we can nudge them. Can we make them more interested in some things like a soaker hose, which could reduce water usage, or soil test kits to find out whether they need fertilizer at all? And can we nudge these people so they are having less pollution come from it? Maybe they'll grow more native plants like that guy. And then we'll actually spend time going out and auditing their house to see, if you got the plant, did you actually plant it? Or are you like my wife and I, have killed plenty of plants on our driveway after getting them because we never got around to planting them in time. And so, because we have a lot of focus, I think an area that's really ripe for a study is disadoption of environmental practices. That we often think, if we could just get people to adopt them, we'll have the engineers to be correct upon the benefits. And then we kind of forget that some people stop using them, right? The rain barrels fill up with mud or leaves, and they lose their benefits, or you don't drain them correctly. So there's a lot of environmental practices that are happening that don't continue, and we need to understand why people don't continue. But anyway, there's so many things to study. I could just talk. But anyway, so then we'll look at the other challenge that we often have is that if we think about how we roll out a program, we often are talking about the wrong people in the room who are making these decisions. That the government people tend to be highly educated, tend to come from a really narrow socioeconomic band, and are these the right way to get people who are of different ethnic backgrounds, other cultural perspectives, to be successful? So we need to understand the demographics better. And again, evidence is going to do that because maybe our own personal experience or our own hypotheses aren't very close to what other people have. So allowing evidence to guide that can make a big difference. So here's an experiment that we did. And we were out, we have our own little research vehicle that we take around and recruit people at. And of course, we promised some confidentiality. We wanted people from the Delaware River watershed. And we always pay people, right? We go, if we're going to be making purchase decisions, then we don't want to ask a survey about whether they buy it. We want to see if they'll buy it. And we'll put money where their mouth is. So they'll get some money just for showing up to our experiment. They can just take it home, and plenty just do. Others will actually buy the item or try to buy the items, and we'll gather that and call it their willingness to pay. And we'll use what's known as a Becker to group Marshak mechanism, which is a demand revealing mechanism that allows us to do that. And then we'll see, do people actually purchase these items? And then in this kind of what I call a sea bear sandbox, right? This is our kind of exploratory world. We can test different nudges. In this case, we're going to test framing, and we're going to test some anchoring. And those are kind of classic behavioral nudges. And we'll see, could those work here if we change the framing? Who's participant? Well, we want to screen them off. We want to make sure they have a garden, that they're not, renters, or they're part of a homeowners association. They need to have some active ability to care for their lawn and landscaping, and they could actually use these products if they bought them. At least 25 years old, so getting away from the student population, and we don't want people to participate more than once. So just basic screening. And a key thing here is that we care about their willingness to pay, right? This is a kind of a measure of their demand for these items, and we always use the random price mechanism in which it's separate. So imagine that you're going off, and your mom says, "Hey, go out to Home Depot and buy me a tree," right? And you say, "Okay, Mom, I don't know how much this tree is that you want." I say, "Well, if it's $30 or less, buy the tree. But if it's more than $30, I don't want the tree." Right? So then you go to the Home Depot and you look at the price, and it's $25. Okay, that's what you get. You buy the tree, you get to keep the $5. Right? If it's higher than that price, then you don't have the tree. You walk home. So the idea is it's independent. You're not like a competitive auction on eBay or something where your bid has some impacting the price you pay. You keep those things separate. So we're asking your mom's willingness to pay for the tree. Well, that's $30. So we use that, and economists are comfortable with collecting that information and using it as a measure of demand. And we'll look at 5 different type of projects. So we brought stakeholders in. We brought the Center for Inland Bays in Delaware and said, "Hey, I got some products that we think might work. What do you think might work? What would you want if you were going to roll out a program to encourage good stewardship at your house? What would you encourage? So you working with the Center for Inland Bays, they said, well, soil test kits, that's really important. Do you even need fertilizer on your lawn or not? Biochar was considered a positive thing. Peat moss, soaker hose, native plants. These were the products that we could offer. They're all about $20-ish, right? Maybe a little bit smaller for the native plant. And then within our Sea Bear sandbox, we could then change it. So some people walked into the experiment and you would get here's the products. What are you willing to pay? That's your no information. Others, I could talk about the benefit that you were going to give to the environment if you did this. And others, I could blame you for doing all the things you didn't do well, that you probably aren't doing well. Unless you start using these products, you're still part of the problem, right? So I could frame it differently. I could frame why we think you should do this. And again, having a kind of a control atmosphere, we can make some comparisons. And then we can play a little bit with a bid slider to see, if I tell you that the price, your starting price should be high, do you actually keep it high? Or if you go low, you keep it low? There's a lot of kind of default and anchoring bias there. So what do we provide for information on this? Pretty basic. Like here's our biochar. We just gave it almost from the side package so that we weren't trying to provide any additional information than they could see it. We all had all displays around so you could touch it, feel it if you wanted to. Well, there's nothing hidden about it, but people could read about that description there. Okay. And then, as I said, one of the key things was this positive framing, right? And I think this is really interesting because we don't know how to message environmental programs very well. Does anyone know what the hippo effect trend is? Anyone know what that is? Hippo. Okay, so if you have a hippo bias, that means you follow the highest paid person's opinion in the room decides what the rule is, right? So maybe the Mitchell Center is like the opposite of the hippo process, but that's often you're saying, okay, we're going to have this new environmental program. We want everyone to use less fertilizer. How should we approach it? Should we talk about do good for the environment or stop doing bad for the environment, right? Both. I can come up with compelling ideas about why we think those could be effective, and usually the hippo in the room gets to decide which one rolls out, and we have no evidence on it. So here's a chance of actually framing it. So we can use positive framing about, hey, you can do more, help out, do something good. Or we could go negative, right? And we can say, hey, stop doing something bad. And here's how you can stop killing fish and causing algal blooms. And again, you might be able to shame people in a way. And which one works? I don't know if we have a great hypothesis walking into this day. And again, we talked about you could change the anchoring of a slider where you could simply move quickly back and forth and put your bid in if you wanted to and see if that matters. Who did we get? We got 336 people, so a pretty good yield for kind of experimental studies like this. Mostly female because they're the ones that in our study that were taking care of the lawns the most, age of 32. 60% own their own residence. And they were moderately concerned with water. Actually, pretty 80% had some concern. In Delaware, we've got lots of problems with watershed issues, so it's probably not surprising that people are concerned about this issue. And what did we see? I'll just jump through, and we've done proper econometrics behind it. But one is not surprising, and that is people care differently about the different products, right? That shouldn't surprise you. This is their willingness to pay. Here's the products. So nothing, okay, they like soaker hoses the best. Okay, that's nice if you're selling soaker hoses. But we want to do something more interesting, which is about the framing, right? And so that's this black and white checkered. And notice in all of the products, having it be positively framed, the people responded well. They were more willing to do something to help the environment. They weren't turned off necessarily by the negative, but there was no difference statistically between that and not providing them any information. If you were trying to nudge them to be a better person was far more compelling than the idea of shaming them. Shaming didn't fail, but if you were the hippo and you supported, hey, you should do negative, well, there's no evidence that it was going to hurt, but it didn't help, right? And here you've actually got evidence that you could go back to the Center for Inland Bays and say, hey, keep it positive, right? That's going to work the best here. We can also dig down and look a little bit. We did find that anchoring the higher value we put also led to higher willingness to pay. So that was significant. We also knew that women paid more. The older they got, they paid more. They owned their residence, they paid more. Rural people paid less, right? So less concerned about it. And we were able to tease this out a bit from a demographics studies. And I call a lot of this exploratory, right? So a lot of things we need to talk about, at least in economics, is sometimes we have main effects that we really designed a study for, and then we have some exploratory, unless we did a pre-analysis plan and put that in. These are kind of exploratory things that we want to keep track of. They are results, but you probably have a lot of multi-hypothesis testing going on there, so we have to be a little bit cautious. And one of the cautions I want to say, and I just find this interesting, so I got to go there, but is looking at how we understand our evidence around nudges. And here's a classic nudge that's out there, and that's on loss framing versus gain framing. A little bit like I just talked about in terms of, am I doing something good or bad? But now we can actually put this in contracts where, you can imagine that, let's say, almost in a student context that would matter. If you do all the assignments on time, this is going to be good for your grade, right? So you have this positive every time they do it, they get something good. Or you could say, you're going to have a perfect grade, and every time you don't turn one in, your grade gets worse and worse and worse, right? And the question is, which is more powerful? Well, there's all this, published evidence that say, well, that loss framing is really there. You promise them the A, and then you threaten to take it away, and people respond better than if they feel like they have to build up to it. And so there's lots of studies there, and if the key thing here is that it's all shifted to the right? So if you've got this loss framing versus gain framing, okay, all these seem to be positive effects. And so you've got, okay, this is a nice nudge. Well, here's another way of looking at those same studies that I just showed earlier and looking at two key elements. One is the standard mean difference, right? That's our bottom. So again, we're seeing most of the studies show this positive impact of this framing. And then if we look at our standard error, where the standard error is largest at the bottom, it's a little upside down, so that's by design, so we get this triangle effect. So what we see is that a study like out here has this really big impact of this, but it's also got this pretty large standard error, right? We saw it a little bit there with the whisker plots, right? These kind of large standard errors. Some are much more clustered. And if we go back and look, well, we can look, are they field experiments, lab experiments? Are they just a stated preference survey? But maybe not a big trend here, but if we look a little bit more, we get a little bit more concerned if we ask how many people were part of the studies. And we start looking and say, well, isn't it interesting? On our far right side here, we got relatively smaller numbers than up here, right? We got 1,000 people up here almost, hundreds up in here. So they got small standard errors. That probably isn't surprising. But they do seem to be a little bit more shifted to the left, right? Now, is there anything else that's striking about this picture? Maybe some of you, that comes out. The striking thing is what happened to studies that could have happened here, right? What happened to the low numbers of people, right, with large standard means that just tended to be around 0 or maybe even negative? Did they not exist? Did people run these studies? They never ran a study that didn't do that? Or, what? They didn't get published. Why didn't they get published?
Because either reviewers didn't like it or they didn't think there was much there.
It's a failed data set, right? I mean, that's how we start calling it. Well, you ran it and it didn't occur, and so you try to publish those results. I mean, either you self-kill them, right? Because you're like, oh, well, no one's ever going to publish that. And that's probably an experienced perspective. The students that get them try to publish it and find there's no way they're going to get published. And so maybe if you get to this large sample size, people might go with these small effects, or even, look at this Dolan paper. It's actually negative. It says actually gain framing is better, right? But we're missing this whole distribution that is likely out there. And this is what's being called an M-type error, right? Where we're beginning to misidentify the magnitude of these effects. If we got small studies and they've got a lot of error, which all of them did, but we only publish the ones that have statistical results, then we're going to see the ones that have the really large impacts be the ones that lead the discipline. And when you scale them up, well, those were kind of the statistical anomalies. And maybe they don't show to be as successful. They could be even S-type errors where they're in the wrong direction, right? Depending on how to do it. But I worry a lot about these M-type errors because even in a meta-analysis, which we often think, hey, well, we'll control for that. We'll look at all the studies that are out there. But if you're systematically not publishing some stuff because it's too small, or then all your meta-analysis are overestimating as well. And so this is one of the challenges of our work because it means that you're going to have to run bigger studies, right? You're going to have to do this. And we've seen this with our own studies. So Paul and colleagues did this study with 46,000 farmers. And they try to nudge them through a simple letter to get people more involved with conservation reserve programs by reminding them how many other people in their county do it. So it's a classic social comparisons nudge. And they found little effect of this kind of nudge. And a reviewer, editor from our top journal writes back that, well, it finds small or no effects to reduce the contribution to the paper. And reviewer 1 and 2 would like you to explore the data more to see if there's somewhere you can find a bigger impact, right? Data mine beyond the scope of the original design that's there. We recently had a paper involving 11,000 farmers that got rejected. That's rejected because we didn't have a theoretical, mechanism about why there was no effect. And I was like, well, how can you have a theoretical mechanism of why something didn't work, right? I mean, why you should have to prove why it did work. But editors of really top journals are still skeptical, even when the sample size is large, to actually publishing it. And this is a problem of our discipline, and something that we're trying to work on, because if we're going to be informing policy, right? If it's just exploration for the sake of all our knowledge, then maybe it's not a big deal. But if we're really trying to inform policy, like we try to motivate it, and we're really trying to care about the environment, then we want to use nudges that work, right? We want to use approaches that actually matter and work. And so we're pushing there. We're concerned a lot about power, statistical power. Basically, if you know a lot, you can have a bigger sample size. If you can, depending on how much variation that's out there. The goal is about 80%. Most of the studies that were looked at in the Economic Journal recently found that the average power is 18%. So far less than what we would say is right for the type of hypothesis that we're testing all the time. So again, we have a problem with underpowered studies. There is a challenge, which is that these things are a lot more expensive to run, right? There's a reason why it's not that just they're sloths, and that's why they have small sample size. These are hard studies to run. And we, here's an example. We went back and tried to do that same study. Remember, I had 336. I felt pretty good. I was glad with my sample size. We ran a proper powered study and realized that we needed 1,200 adult consumers to really be able to make the types of claims that we were on it. And so, that raises the price up tremendously if we're paying people to participate. And so we went back into our CBEAR sandbox and said, well, let's replicate it, right? Could we see the defaults matter and the anchoring that I showed there? And then we can test a couple of other things that were along the way and look at it. And then one other cool thing is, like, if we all start being nudged, if we all get, do we become immune to it, right? Or do we suddenly, you tricked me once, okay, that's that, but you're not going to trick me twice. So we actually warned people that they were being nudged, and saying that the results of these nudges tends that they bid higher. So we try to see if that awareness would make that problem go away. But another key thing was, again, a kind of a classic hippo problem that environmentalists face is, how do you convey the problem, right? If you're trying to motivate people, how do you do this? And there's a kind of a classic study, like, it bleeds, it leads, right? So news obviously goes to the human interest story, and if we see an identifiable victim of something, that is one hypothesis how to do it. Or do you use the information that are given by our natural science colleagues about the problems of water? And so again, we're able to use this approach to compare directly these messages, one on scientific information about the problems of the water, or focusing on one person, this poor guy who died because of Vibrio, and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation believes that Vibrio grows better in areas that have high nutrient pollution. And so we could, focus it on one story of a person who died in 3 days after he got scratched by his crab traps in the Chesapeake, right? And is that a more compelling story than just we got lots of problems that are out there and they're bad? And so we tested that. We also tested this idea of defaults, but we went to the extremes where the slider was on one side or the other, and we can see if that mattered. And then finally, this idea that we're going to tell you what's all wrong. We're going to tell you that we're nudging you, so watch out, and maybe you will, maybe you won't be tricked this time. And so what did we find, right? So a couple things that pop out right away is, again, we use some soaker hoses, fertilizer, biochar, test kits in this. And again, those values changed. We could care about those a bit, but we're more interested in the, these other factors. Our age and our gender preferences showed up again, right? So we had females playing more, age being older seemed to, again, be a robust finding, even when we had a larger sample size. We did find that identifiable victim story, maybe it's not surprising, that was pretty convincing to people. People paid more money when they saw that this could have human life impacts. And again, that was a guy who was a military and a police officer, so it was a kind of a sad, tragic case. But again, if you kind of try to roll out programs, maybe talking about how they affect people, imagine if it was a kid or something, probably even more compelling. But we didn't find the default thing to show up, right? The only time we found the default to matter is when we were nudging them to warn them about it, and in that case, when we made them aware of it, they became more concerned. So somehow trying to inoculate them from the effect actually made it worse. So that wasn't something that's there and needs further explanation. But our main idea of trying to find a repeat of the anchoring wasn't found. And I think that's just kind of an interesting result that when we, even in our own studies, when we try to scale it up 4 times, you would think a robust finding. We found a really large effect of anchoring almost in the 40% level before, but then it disappeared, right? And that's, I guess one of the things to be careful about these nudges is sometimes they're just not going to be there. In fact, the better studies sometimes maybe the ones least likely to find because they're large enough to avoid just the noise that's out there. And so, that is something that we found. And even the effect we did find with that, that giving people awareness was a smaller impact. It was a smaller nudge impact than we saw originally in our original study. So, kind of cautionary things about why we need to do more of this science. So, where does this leave us, right? Where does this leave us? I mean, I do think this is an exciting time to be thinking about human behavior and environmental issues. And I know that here at the Mitchell Center, you guys have been looking at this in lots of different dimensions, and I think that experiments are something that could be a nice tool to add to your toolbox, because we can find things that do work, and that do work in the context of real purchasing decisions and real programs that are trying to identify messages about how to convey people, how do you frame things positive versus negative, what kind of messages work for the right types of populations in Maine, right? Again, probably lots of different messages that would work for a forest owner versus a resident of the coast that maybe has a secondary home, right? And you're trying to deal with very different populations there. And this can give you what I like to, we talk about best practices, right? So there needs to be best practices about communication. And if we had groups that track this and we could build more and more about what works for whom and why and when, that would increase our general ability to use these types of nudges for environment benefits. We also, I would argue, need to rethink what successful research is, right? We have to move away from finding, if we find something that is statistically significant, we are golden, we now get our master's degree, and we can publish it and go on. We need to be able to find ways in which results that are non-results or counterintuitive results still have a place for academic value. And what I'm pushing hard for is the pre-analysis plans to say, you know what, we designed this intentionally. We had the right power to begin with, and look, we could detect. We can't prove. We can never, say there is no effect, right? You can never disprove something, but you can say we had ours designed to study a 3% increase in behavior, and we didn't find it, right? So we could say, hey, we didn't find a 3%. Maybe there's a 1% that we didn't design for, but it does allow us to take studies that have null results from a statistical perspective and put them into context, and they should be very valuable. And we should hope that reviewers and editors will respond to that. This goes back. There's kind of interesting stuff about the issue of evaluation, and Rossi was really talking about the metallic rules, his iron law, and his stainless steel law. And basically, they break down into the better design you have on an evaluation, the more likely you'll find the program didn't change people's minds or have any impact. And that's probably good to keep in mind. What we're now 30 years afterwards and still learning that lesson, to be able to distinguish that sometimes finding a nudge doesn't work maybe is one of the most important results that one can find, so that we invest into policies and programs on things that do work, and we need to take time to do that and acknowledge that that's where we're going. So that concludes my talk, but I'm happy to answer questions, and again, just happy to be here. So thank you.
Great. So who's going to be the brave soul that asks the first question? So I'll be the brave soul
Thank
that
you.
asks the question. So the problem about not being able to publish negative results or get that information out there that this has been studied, this didn't work. I'm wondering just your thoughts, Kent, on dealing with that. Did you communicate with editors or reviewers saying it might be useful to publish this information, or could there be a repository somewhere where some of the no result information gets sent so that somebody wanting to follow up on that or study that problem would know, oh, this group did that? What your thoughts on?
So there's a slow movement right now that people are getting behind that idea. One is to publish replication studies, and to do that. And partly, some of those replication studies have been very powerful at showing that these results can't be replicated. So they've had a good bang for their buck there. The social psychology did that. What, it was like 70% or something like that didn't replicate. And now economics has been like 40%, 30%, a little bit less, but it's still pretty alarming insofar that these are highly published, recognized studies. So there's some value of just going back and properly powering these studies and doing it. And we are trying to push. There is a journal now. I think is it World Development or is it Development that actually is, if you write the study, you can write it before you collect the data, and they'll agree to publish the study no matter what happens. If you have a good question, you have the proper design, and you're going to follow through on your plan, you can, and I think that's, I've tried to push the AJE and that and say, hey, wouldn't there be a spot where we could actually say, yes, this is a great question, and no matter what you do, as long as you design the study well, you'll get published. And I think that's a way forward that would help us a lot. And it would otherwise a temptation for the master's student, to the postdoc, to the faculty member to find something of meaning in this story. And some of our best researchers are really creative people and can find meaning in any story, and I think we took pride in it, right? Hey, I can come up. Hey, don't worry about that. I have a new idea how that's going to be really meaningful to the literature, but that's problematic for policy. And a repository would be an interesting idea. It'd be greater if they could just get the full recognition within academia. But maybe that's where we need to go too, is to say, hey, before you bury it on your own computer hard drive, let's make sure this sees the light of day, so that when we're really doing a meta-analysis, we could actually have these things be able to be taken into account. Some journals are beginning to publish null results a little bit better, and again, maybe by framing them within a saying, hey, I was able to detect this amount of effect, that can help, right? And again, if we have good enough studies. But it's a great question. It's a challenge I don't think we've overcome at all.
Thanks so much, again. This has been incredibly insightful and inspiring as a graduate student to hear this. So I think that graduate students everywhere kind of feel that as well, even though, especially here at the university, we have incredible professors and advisors that really work with us and encourage us, regardless of those results and the significance and really pushing us. But I think that we definitely see that, you know, and we can feel it too, that you have to have these significant results, or you have to have this, you know, magnitude if you're going to get published, if you're going to be, you know, successful in your field or known in your field. And so I'm just wondering what advice you have to graduate students who might, you know, not feeling the pressure from our like advisors and professors who understand that, you know, and are kind of rooting for us or advocates for us, but that pressure from kind of the outside researching world.
Yeah, I think it's really challenging for young scholars like yourself who are going into this world, and maybe that's why, you know, finding groups of people who do good research and have resources that can help invest in it, because these are going to be more expensive studies to do. But the integrity is an important piece, right? And we've seen high-profile people go down pretty large, you know, big ramifications for not having the integrity of their results and data mining to an extreme level. So you want to be heading in the right path and know that the field is going to catch up to you. There's something good about that too, that if you're worried about this, you know, the fields only can go in one direction, which is we're going to follow this approach. But I guess having some knowledge about, you know, what your study could detect, learn more about power analysis. I never had a class on power analysis. I went to Cornell, got my PhD, never heard about it. I was told by my advisors, one of the founders of experimental economics, if you have 30 people in a treatment, you're great, you know. And so I was given bad advice by a very preeminent guy, and everyone in the country I know knows the same kind of advice. Oh yeah, we just do 30, now we're up to 50, we're feeling good, you know. It's like, well, learn about power analysis. We need to be teaching our students power analysis, because, you know, we're under trained on it, because it's, you know, you might have to do simulations, you might have to do, it's not entirely straightforward all the time. So learning those tools will put you in good shape. It will also, the policymakers that are following this type of things are really interested in this. I mean, USDA, I mean, I'm helping design their process right now, and they're very keen, because the Office of Management and Budget doesn't want to use these types of studies unless they have a lot of rigor to them. And medicine's way ahead of us, right? Medicine, or even development economics, they've been doing these types of approaches for a long time. It's now just the kind of you know, ag and environmental economists are catching up to it. So you know, learn about it. Let some of those results be as flat as they may be, without having to dig deep into it, or look into multi-hypothesis testing to make sure that if you are digging around your data, you're still doing it right, that you still can say something. So learn a little bit about what that is and how you have to adjust it. But it's exciting work, but it's challenging. Yeah.
You told us a little bit about some past projects. I'm curious, Project Wicked.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about some planned nudges you might look into as part of that project?
Sure, absolutely. So we're looking at some disadoption issues, right? The idea of whether people actually, even, you know, that they take home the native plant, do they still grow it? So we're having people take pictures with their cell phones and send it to us, and get you know, to see is that plant dead or not, and you know, of course they're going to die, but can we nudge them to keep them better alive or not? One of the exciting projects that we're working on is about irrigation, and we again developed an app in which farmers are sending us their water meter usage, and we're doing this in the Mid-Atlantic and in the Southeast and in Colorado, because from a water management perspective, that has big implications around saltwater intrusion, right? If there's too much usage of water in the middle areas of the state of Delaware, which is, you know, it's a small peninsula, it can actually bring in salt water from the coast that could affect the beach communities' drinking water, or irrigation that's happening on the coastal area. And so we're getting apps that can now have people voluntarily report their water usage. From a water management perspective, that's better, because they only get annual water usage. And again, it gives us a CBER sandbox where we can change the incentives for getting voluntary reports. We can test, we're getting some selection bias, because we can find out their annual reports and see, Are we getting only the low water users or the heavy water users? Because we're not going to get them all. So we're doing that. And then again, anytime we can design ourselves the interface, we can do lots of different play with if we have a big enough sample size. So we're testing that. The other thing I'm really excited about, I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but I hope so. Oh, I got another cool project too. But so here's a cool project. I think this is neat. So many of you guys know about combined sewer overflow problems, right? That problem is really cool. I'm going to give away our good idea, but I hope you guys can join me and work on it because it's such a cool idea. So if you're not familiar with it, you got big cities. They when they design their wastewater treatment plants, they combine them with just the sewer or just the drainage system in it. So you get a little bit of a rain. It all goes and is treated by the wastewater treatment plant, and that's okay. But what happens is you get a sizable rain. Sometimes in places like Pittsburgh or something, it's a couple inches, and suddenly that overflows the whole sewer system. So you're taking raw sewage and throwing it straight into the stream, and so that's pretty bad for the environment. But changing that system is extremely expensive. To separate the storm drainage and the sewer system is really expensive. So the question is, could you use a nudge to do this? And so we're working with the city of Wilmington. New York has a new program out that we're trying to work with, in which you'll get a text called "Wait." And what are you supposed to wait? You're supposed to not flush your toilet, right? Don't run your laundry at that point, because here comes a storm. We know the storm's coming, like yesterday, and we say, you know what? Just don't use don't tax the sewer system. So the water that's going in is just from the streets, and it can just rush out and go into the streams. It's not a big deal. And then afterwards, there'll be a little, okay, you can flush now, and you can go flush your toilets or turn on your dishwasher or something. And the question is, could this work, right? And how do we make it work? And if we could get water use level from the household level at an hourly basis, it'd be the dream. Right now, it looks like we can get maybe about a day, which isn't perfect. But we can begin testing whole bunches of messages and nudges, incentives, right? Because if you can really do this, you can pay people for every time they wait. It's a lot cheaper than having to build new systems. And so that's another kind of water in a coastal area that we're trying to launch right now and working on doing it. It's not going to happen next year, but I don't know. I think it's cool. So yeah, that's an example. Yes.
These are wonderful studies, wonderful analysis. My understanding of your EPSCoR project is that you have a number of campuses involved that aren't research oriented. So how do they respond, or how do you bring them into the process that you're doing when this is very exciting but might not be what they do?
Right. So it's a great point. Our project well. We work with our historical black college and university, Delaware State University, our technical university system, Delaware Tech College, and a minority-serving liberal arts school called Wesley College. And other than Delaware State, there's not much of a research presence. And even at Delaware State, it's not equivalent to Michigan State in Michigan, right? We're a small state, and we have limited resources. And it's frankly a hard thing to do that. Now, one of the things that we try to do is layered mentoring, right? So, part of my job is to come up with ideas and to raise money, and then all the good work, the hard work, gets done by other people. But there's a lot to go out and collect 1,200 data points from people. There's a lot of recruitment that happens. So sometimes we can bring in our undergraduates there and get them engaged and feel like they're doing something that's really meaningful. They work with the graduate students and postdocs to help implement the studies. A lot of the studies have been programmed by Delaware Tech students, right? So they build the underlying software that we use, and so we tap into their computer science students, and then they help us do this. There's actually we're going to do a project on septic systems. We think that they'd be really cool. We might run military-grade drones over. We're working with the Army Proving Ground, and they might run military drones over houses that can detect whether you have a leaking septic system or not. And apparently Delaware State's got a big septic program, right? So we can bring septic engineers for workforce development and others to understand how do we again, encourage people to keep their septic systems maintained and cleaned out. And we could use, again, these kind of approaches, because right now, people don't know. We know that septic systems are a problem, right? These are the home level wastewater treatment plants or systems, but there's a lot of problems that cause coming from there. So could we again use different levels of skills and expertise, hopefully improving a workforce so that when they go out and work on these jobs, they can do it, or they come on and become researchers and join us at their graduate level and work on them. So that's how we're trying to get at it. Yeah, great question.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll have those students who are able to stay and have a little more conversation with Dr. Messer, which could be right in the room right there, and the rest of us will say thank you.